You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
Yeah, this is Dr. Alan Garfinkel Gold. I'm the director and founder of the California Rock Art Foundation. And we've been around for about 5 years. If you want to find us on the internet under californiarockart.org. And if you want to look for some of the research that I've done, dralangarfinkel.com. I'm going to take you through a little journey today and talk about Rock Art 101, starting out from the very preliminary elements of what's rock art. And I'll help define the subject and talk about its various machinations. Ready? Here we go. So rock art. Rock art is the visual remnants of prehistoric and historic human cultures. It's found carved and painted on rock surfaces throughout the world. It's really the tangible evidence of a symbolic record of the way people felt, what they saw, what they deemed important, their cosmology or their religion. It's a form of communication. Frequently, there's many manifestations of the ways of life which might be totally foreign to us. These are the kinds of images that were not intended for really us to see or even really understand. The terminology of rock art per se is rather misleading. We use the term art, but only in a rather different way. Art in the Western world is often not used as a term to refer to indigenous, non-Western, pre-literate people, but that's what we're talking about. People who live on nature's conditions would hardly understand a separate concept for what we might term art. Yet such people experience and feel all that is experienced and felt while enjoying art. They may even experience and feel the same thing more deeply and even more unconditionally than those of us who have separated art from life and placed it far, away from our traditional, the way we live in art galleries or art museums. Rock art, or art that we find on the mountains, the canyons, in caves, are found throughout the world. There's tens of thousands of prehistoric archaeological rock art sites throughout the world with millions or even many millions of individual images. These sites are rather fragile. They're actively being destroyed by both the natural conditions and cultural activities, human activities. Rock art sites are part of the archaeological record. In fact, it's one of the most visible, and I feel one of the more important or potentially informative elements of the archaeological record. The general public has a tremendous interest in rock art. It's one of those rare areas where we have many different avocationalists, and they've made important scholarly contributions to the study of rock art. Many sites are still completely unknown, and most have, often these rock art sites have never been fully documented. Rock art primarily refers to drawings or paintings made by native people, indigenous people, on rock surfaces. These include images that are made by scraping away gravel or earth to reveal the underlying soil, especially in a desert environment. These desert areas are particularly favored, but rock art can be found in forests, along rivers, and even on the tops of mountains. Most rock art is prehistoric and beyond the memory of living people. In a few places, rock art is in fact still being produced, but that is very, very rare. Sometimes there are native oral histories and sacred narratives that provide us with clues to the meaning of rock art and their function. And in some rare instances, sites have been actually named in the indigenous languages and give us a bit more of a clue as to what their significance was to native people. Well, a rock art site can consist of either a single design or, even more frequently, an assemblage of hundreds or even many, many more images, all concentrated at one place. These particular rock art sites might be in plain view, or they may be displayed where it can be seen at a great distance. Sometimes images are placed where they are not intended to be seen. They're hidden and are secreted away in rock shelters or even caves. The major techniques used to create rock art are in two fashions. there's a typology or the classification of rock art sites. Figures that are painted on rock surfaces, at least in America, are called pictographs. That's Pictographs. Figures pecked or scraped or incised on rock are called petroglyphs. That's Petroglyphs. So pictographs and petroglyphs are the broad classifications for much of rock art. Yet there are other elements of rock art that also occur as well. Sometimes we have figures, often quite large, sometimes it's abstract, but other times representational. They're formed by removing the rocks or earth to expose the underlying contrasting color of the earth. And these are called intaglios or geoglyphs. You've probably heard of the Nazca lines, or even along the Colorado River of California on both sides. We have certain deities and supernatural elements and creatures that are valued in the religious traditions of the native people, and those are found ensconcing the landscape. Figures are formed often by moving rocks or boulders. They might form lines or curvilinear designs, and these might be called rock alignments. Sometimes these have archaeoastronomical significance. Pictographs, as I said, is an American term. It's not used elsewhere in the world. They're painted rock pictures, and the most common colors of these pictures are black, white, and red. In California and the Great Basin, the predominant color, in the majority, that's used most frequently, of course, is red. When we look at pictographs and their pigment, red, again, is the most common color. It's usually derived from red ochre, which is identified as hematite or iron oxide. And this is the pigment that's found naturally in many soils and is the most common pigment used throughout the world. One of the second most common is black, which is a charcoal or a manganese oxide. White is rarer, but also common. It's formed by a number of different substances: chalky rock, chalk, limestone, diatomaceous earth, sometimes volcanic ash, also made from white ash from wood, fires, and also ground up shell. Limonite, the yellow, is rare, but also used in certain paintings. Green is very rare, and it's used as a malachite or copper-rich mineral. Also, selidonite is used as a volcanic to produce green. And the rarest of the rare is blue, which is usually an azurite or some sort of a copper mineral as well. The paints for pictographs were prepared by grinding the pigment into powder. This was accomplished in a small, shallow mortar in the bedrock, or with a portable pallet or a little stone bowl. Paint was made using a binder, and it needs animal fat, blood, eggs, sap, or oil from seeds that then are composed and mixed together to make paint. When we have the paint produced, we have that manufactured with the right consistency, mixed with the binder, and it has to be done that way because it would not survive otherwise just with a watery solution. The pictograph paints are applied in a variety of ways with fingers and hands. Hand dipped in paint is a common symbol. One would blow around the hand to make either a positive or a negative image. Sometimes one would blow the pigment on the hand, and the hand would then be embellished against the rock face. Sometimes brushes were used, plant fibers such as a yucca brush or animal hair. The pigments sometimes used like a crayon, a charred stick, or chalk-like rocks are used to draw. We use both dry and liquid pigment. Sometimes it's blown through a tube or sprayed from the mouth. Spraying can be done completely over the hand to produce that negative image that you see in some of the images that accompany this PowerPoint. Pigments are also used by native people to embellish themselves on their faces, on their body, clothing, and artifacts. There's many painted artifacts, but often they have not withstood the ages well, and sometimes in some cases it is possible to identify certain objects in prehistoric sites and elsewhere, dry caves, that provide clues to the symbolism and meaning that appears on the rock art, such as on atlatls, which were spear throwers, or bull roarers, which were used to replicate the sound of the wind or thunder. Rock paintings often weather away and are prone to destruction. They fade and the paint chips away, and it's sometimes covered by soot, grime, or even alkaline accretions, where you'll see that water or that alkaline materials that seem to be accreted or begin to cover up the paintings. In some instances, they make the paintings difficult to see. The red pigment appears to saturate the rock and stain it, and sometimes it preserves better than the other colors. With petroglyphs, rock drawings, we're talking about carvings. Often they're made by direct percussion, like pecked with a hard stone hammer, often made of white quartz or some other resilient and hard tool stone. The images are sometimes rendered by indirect percussion, similar to a hammer or a chisel, and this allows much greater precision. Petroglyphs are manufactured also by abrading or rubbing grooves into the rock, and that abrasion, it often works on softer rocks such as sandstone, limestone, or even soapstone. Some rock drawings are composed of what appear to be random cups and grooves, and sometimes the rocks are found with many thin linear grooves. And it's sometimes difficult to identify whether these are natural or cultural. One enigmatic form of a petroglyph, a rock drawing, is called the pit and groove style. It's also called cupules. And this style of rock drawing is one of the earliest traditions of rock art in the world. There may be hundreds of individual pits, not bigger than the fingertip. Some are less than an inch deep. These cupules are found in association with bedrock mortars often, and bedrock features are the common mortar holes. These are the immovable stone rotary grinders used by native peoples to process seeds, nuts, and sometimes other foods, including meat. These features are part of the bedrock stone surfaces. They're often found at village sites. These petroglyphs, another sort of particular style or manifestation, are that sometimes there are engravings that look like upside down U's, and these images often are akin to and representative of female genitalia. They're called vulviforms. These are motifs where one woman rock art researcher had called them yoni rocks. That's the name from East Indian term for the female reproductive organs. And another form is a faceted rock that shows abrasion like that. It's known as the Stillwater faceted style. Occasionally we find petroglyphs that were enhanced by pigment. So it's kind of a pictograph petroglyph. Usually they have red, white, or black paint literally within the interstices of the rock drawings. Sun and moisture often causes rocks to crack, and the natural elements also cause the rock to weather and produce a patina on the surface. This patina is a different and darker color than the original unmodified rock. The most distinct patina is that frequently found in the desert. It's on basalt and sandstone, and one can recognize this as an accumulation. It's actually an organic living matter. It's called desert varnish. It gives the rock a different color, ranges from brown to black to bluish gray in appearance. Rock drawings are manufactured on stones with desert varnish, and they seem to stand out very, very distinctively, because what happens is you peck through that veneer, that desert varnish veneer, and then the lighter heart rock appears, and it takes quite a long time for the rock to re-varnish, and so it's preserved for literally hundreds and many times thousands and thousands of years. What you will see on these desert varnish rocks, the recent figures are lighter in color, the older figures are darker, and as time goes on, the varnish darkens the images, and the images themselves become the same color or shade as the original rock itself. As soon as the image is pecked, the varnish begins to rebuild in the cracks. There comes a point when that design itself is in fact the same color as the background rock. And we found in the Coso Range of Eastern California, it takes about 6,000 years for that to occur. When one can no longer easily make out those figurative elements, that's almost complete repatination. And that's, of course, a great indication of the age of the glyph. You can make out these ancient glyphs only with side lighting and even by feel sometimes. Another form of rock drawings or rock art, petroglyphs, is scratched rock art. These are images that can be nearly invisible and often frequently overlooked unless the light is just right. They're made by scratching with a sharp rock, perhaps using a piece of flake toolstone like obsidian, chert, or basalt. The resulting design elements are usually only very, very fine scratches and are often quite small. We can tell that scratched art is the work of people since the designs are sometimes patterned. We see intricate crisscrosses, maze, chain designs, and these are very, very fine incised lines that appear to be rather recent in age. These thin line designs were so innocuous that, in fact, Campbell Gren and his colleagues, when they were doing a study in the Coso Range of Eastern California, completely overlooked them. They were only begun to be recognized, I would say, a decade or two ago, and these small incised lines are certainly a form of rock art, and we have found some with faintly more elaborate designs, producing mazes and cross-hatching, covering or embellishing the older rock art. The geoglyphs or intaglios we had alluded to earlier. These are the large designs made by scraping away the surface of the soil, removing stones from the desert pavement, or almost three-dimensionally, basically crafting the landscape. These are very large figures, normally best seen from a distance and from the air, and at some higher elevations above the landscape. Geoglyphs or intaglios have been discovered by people flying in aircraft above them. On the ground, they may be difficult to identify. These fragile figures are easily disturbed, and they can be destroyed by vehicles if they are rolled over them, and they can then be completely eroded away. Rock alignments are something that's produced by moving the rocks, usually on desert pavements. They're linear arrangements, sometimes more complicated circular or more complicated abstract patterns, and they're sometimes associated with more complicated and complex geoglyphs. These rock alignments sometimes have been suggested to have astronomical significance. Some may point to places on the horizon that predict the location of the sun during solstice events, such as winter solstice, sunrise, or sunset. That's it.